Trump thought he could bully Canada into submission with his punitive tariffs. But instead, he's ignited a nationwide boycott that's crushing American businesses from coast to coast. While the world watches this trade war unfold, what we're seeing is nothing short of an economic rebellion that's reshaping North American commerce forever. The tensions reached a boiling point when Trump began threatening a 25% increase in import tariffs on Canadian goods earlier this year.
Announcing on Truth Social that starting October 1st, we will be imposing a 100% tariff on any branded or patented pharmaceutical product unless the company is building their manufacturing plant in America. Also on October 1st, a 25% tariff on all, quote, heavy big trucks made in other parts of the world. And finally, a 50% tariff on all kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and associated products, as well as a 30% tariff on upholstered furniture.
But that was just the beginning. By October, the situation had escalated dramatically with the announcement of even more aggressive measures, including a 100% tariff on pharmaceutical products and significant duties on everything from kitchen cabinets to upholstered furniture. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were economic weapons aimed directly at Canada's economy. Since these threats materialized, the Great White North sentiment toward its southern neighbor has been decidedly less neighborly. Thanks to a combination of consumer-led boycotts and government-imposed counter-tariffs, products like Florida orange juices and Kentucky bourbons have all but vanished from Canadian shelves. Store owners report that American brands are gathering dust while Canadian alternatives fly off the shelves at record pace. But the real story isn't just about what's missing from store shelves. It's about the massive economic damage Trump's policies are inflicting on American businesses. Tourism from Canada to the United States has plummeted to historic lows, although it's estimated that 2/3 of Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the border. Car trips to the U.S. have sharply declined for 8 consecutive months and were down 34% in August 2025 compared to the same month last year. To understand the scale of this disaster, we need to look at the numbers. According to the U.S. Travel Association, Canadians are the largest group of foreign visitors to the U.S., and their absence is creating economic devastation in border states and tourist destinations across America. The shift in Canadians' travel preferences dovetails with a souring national mood toward the U.S. and Ipsos poll for Global News released in early February. After Trump had announced the tariffs, found that 68% of residents surveyed thought less of their southern neighbor. The anger runs deep, but it's targeted specifically at Trump's administration, not the American people themselves. Lorna Hunt, CEO of the tour company Great Canadian Holidays, said most of the firm's U.S. tours are now dead in the water because so many of their Canadian customers have backed out. The anger is not with the American people. The anger is with Donald Trump. And the feeling is that if he is going to wage an economic war against Canada, something we never asked for, then why on earth would Canadians spend a nickel in the United States when they don't have to? The numbers paint a devastating picture for American businesses. The U.S. Travel Association estimated that even a 10% reduction in Canadian tourism to the U.S. would spell a $2.1 billion drop in spending and a loss of 14,000 American jobs. But the reality is much worse. We're looking at drops of 25 to 34% in different sectors. An expanded trade war ensnaring Canada, Mexico, China, and even Europe, according to the research firm Tourism Economics, could result in a $22 billion loss in tourism revenue from international visitors. But tourism is just the tip of the iceberg. A Buy Canada movement is intensifying, with 71% of Canadians saying they plan to buy fewer U.S. goods this year, according to retail data consulting firm Dunnhumby. That pullback is expected to cause a significant drop in U.S. exports to Canada, particularly in food and alcohol. In 2024, Canada was the U.S.'s second largest food export market, valued at $28.4 billion, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, those exports are drying up as Canadian consumers actively seek alternatives from other countries. The alcohol industry is getting particularly hammered. U.S. alcohol sales are virtually non-existent in large swaths of Canada, as most premiers hold firm on keeping those products off store shelves. Brown-Forman, the parent company of major U.S. alcohol brands like Jack Daniel's Whiskey and Woodford Reserve Bourbon, reported in its recent quarterly earnings that sales to Canada have dropped by an eye-popping 62%. What's fascinating is how this boycott is spreading beyond Canada's borders. European consumers, sharing the same frustrations with U.S. foreign policy, are also rejecting American products. A European Central Bank survey revealed that 44% of Europeans are turning away from U.S. brands. This has contributed to plummeting sales for U.S. companies, especially Tesla, which saw a nearly 28% drop in European sales amid a litany of other factors. Meanwhile, Canada's media consumption habits are undergoing a dramatic transformation. Viewership is reportedly up 34% on GEM, CBC's ad-supported streaming service, and especially on Canadian-produced programs like Schitt's Creek and Murdoch Mysteries. A spokesperson for Indigo, the country's largest bookseller, said sales of Canadian-authored books are up 25% year over year. Canadians are actively choosing to support their own cultural products over American alternatives. But here's where Trump's plan really backfires. Instead of weakening Canada, his tariffs have actually unified the country like never before. Prime Minister Mark Carney has emerged as a formidable opponent, using hockey metaphors and national pride to rally Canadians against Trump's economic aggression. Carney's rise to power came at a critical moment. After winning the Liberal Party leadership race to replace Justin Trudeau, he was sworn in as Prime Minister with a clear mandate, standing up to Trump and his destructive economic policies.
And Carney's trip to the UK also saw him talk a bit about CUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico agreement that is set to be jointly reviewed by the countries next year.
I think what all of this underscores is the importance of the upcoming review of CUSMA. We're doing our consultations for that, as the Americans, as are the Mexicans, and there will be discussions that begin in a few months' time. And our objective is going to be obviously the best deal for Canada, but also to get ourselves in a position where there aren't these specific issues, important issues that are erupting, on an episodic basis, if I can put it that way.
Canada is set to review the agreement on its own in the coming months. The federal government launching public consultations to hear from communities, lawmakers, and industry leaders before a new agreement is negotiated with the U.S. and Mexico. In the more immediate lens, Carney says he spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump earlier this week in New York, that meeting coming around the same time Washington imposed tariffs on pharmaceutical goods.
We're engaged with the U.S. In ongoing discussions on some of those specific strategic areas. Those conversations are ongoing. I had a higher level conversation with the president a few days ago.
His recent meeting with Trump in New York, where he confronted the American president about the devastating impact of these tariffs, demonstrated his willingness to go toe-to-toe with Washington. The conversation happened just as Trump was announcing his latest round of punitive measures, including those 100% pharmaceutical tariffs that threaten to disrupt healthcare supply chains across North America. Carney coined the phrase elbows up, an ice hockey term meaning to fight back, which has become a national rallying cry. The movement has taken on a life of its own, with Canadian celebrities and politicians alike embracing the message of economic resistance. Canadian comedian Mike Myers joined the campaign, appearing in Liberal Party ads wearing a jersey with Never 51 emblazoned on his back, a direct rejection of Trump's suggestion that Canada should become America's 51st state. Myers revealed a black t-shirt on Saturday Night Live bearing the Canadian flag and the phrase, "Canada is not for sale," creating an unforgettable moment that resonated across the country. Carney's background as former head of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, combined with his Harvard hockey experience, has positioned him perfectly to take on Trump. International observers note that Carney is someone who knows what he's doing when it comes to economic matters.
Well, I spent more time in opposition than I did as a minister, and I was a minister for a few years here in Quebec. So I'm very sympathetic to the need for opposition parties to oppose. But at some point, they've also got to propose and show that they can be a government in waiting. They can't have it both ways on the Conservative side. They can't, on the one hand, constantly say this is an unparalleled crisis, we've got to do something about it, and then the minute the Prime Minister goes to the United Nations or goes to Great Britain to do just that, to deal with it on the international stage in New York at the UN, to deal with it with international partners in London, they can't say, well, where are you? What's happening? You're not taking this seriously. That's the problem with the Conservatives' constant nagging approach. All you got to do is this, all you got to do is that. And when they say things like that, Marcia, they're just showing their total lack of experience and expertise. That's why Carney is so appreciated. And Canadians generally see in Carney somebody who knows what he's doing, who can handle these big things. Can the Conservatives continue talking to their base successfully? Absolutely. And they did very well in the last election, and they were only a few points off from the Liberals. But that was down from the 28% lead that they had. And some of that has to do with attitude. If the attitude is constantly nagging, constantly complaining, constantly finger pointing, constantly saying that the other guys are just no good, when Carney is respected and considered very good by everybody else in the world, maybe the Conservatives are the ones who are offside here.
His expertise isn't just theoretical. He's navigated global financial crises and understands the complexities of international trade better than perhaps any other world leader currently in office. This economic credibility has given him the authority to challenge Trump's narrative and rally not just Canadians, but international partners to Canada's cause. His message resonates with clarity and determination. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. These words have become a rallying cry for Canadian sovereignty and economic independence. The political impact has been remarkable. According to NPR, Canada's Liberal Party was poised for a historic election defeat until Trump began his trade war with the country. Carney won the general election in April 2025, largely on a platform of standing up to Trump and protecting Canadian economic interests. What makes this situation even more damaging for Trump is that his own justification for the tariffs, stopping fentanyl and illegal immigration, doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Canadian officials have repeatedly pointed out that less than 1% of the fentanyl intercepted at the U.S. border comes from Canada. The tariffs were imposed under the pretext of addressing an emergency situation to address the flow of illicit drugs across the northern border, but the data simply doesn't support this claim. The economic realities are becoming impossible to ignore. Canada and the United States have the world's most comprehensive and dynamic trading relationship, which supports millions of jobs in both countries. They are each other's largest trading partners with $2.5 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border every day. Trump's tariffs are disrupting this relationship and hurting American workers and businesses in the process. The ripple effects are spreading throughout the American economy like wildfire. Tariffs are disrupting American supply chains, causing delays and increased costs that make American-made products more expensive. Due to the sudden uncertainty around trade relations, businesses on both sides of the border are delaying investments, further slowing growth. Canadian companies that rely on cross-border supply chains are facing logistical and financial challenges, but they're adapting by finding new markets and supply sources. Meanwhile, American businesses are seeing reduced demand from Canadian buyers due to increased prices, slowing overall economic growth in the United States. The advertising industry is also feeling the impact. Dollars are shifting as some brands pull back on ad spend in the US, while others are updating their media mixes to invest more in local Canadian publishers. Advertisers have started leaning into national pride messaging as a positive way to reframe everyday Canadians' frustrations, including Maple Leaf Foods' Look for the Leaf takeover and Prime Minister Mark Carney's hockey-inspired Elbows Up advertisements. What's particularly striking is how different the Canadian and American markets are becoming. Canada's population of 37 million is roughly 1/10 the size of the U.S. population of 331 million. But Canadians are proving they can have an outsized economic impact when they act collectively. The geographic challenges that once made targeting Canadian consumers difficult are now working in Canada's favor, as the boycott movement spreads organically across the country's vast territory. The data privacy landscape is also playing a role. Unlike the US, Canada has not one but two major federal privacy laws on its books: the 1983 Privacy Act and the 2000 Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. This regulatory framework is giving Canadian advertisers and consumers more control over their data and economic choices. Trump's ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, has tried to blame Canadian politicians for the low travel numbers, saying he's not surprised that there are Canadians who are not traveling to America when you have political leaders running national campaigns that are anti-American. But this misses the point entirely. Canadians aren't anti-American, they're anti-Trump and his destructive policies. The boycott is showing remarkable staying power. According to Statistics Canada data, the number of Canadian residents coming back from the U.S. by car in August dropped a stunning 34% compared to the same month last year. That's the 8th consecutive month of year-over-year declines, an unprecedented phenomenon outside of the COVID-19 health crisis. And it's not just day trippers going by car who are turning on U.S. travel. The number of Canadians returning by air from the U.S. fell 25.4% in August. The CEO of Calgary-based WestJet told Canada's CTV News that it was seeing a very significant 25% drop in Canadians' U.S. travel demand since Trump's tariff announcements, with Mexican and Caribbean destinations benefiting from falling interest in American ones. Even specific regions are feeling unprecedented pain. Canadians accounted for around 40% of international visitors to South Florida's Palm Beach County last year. The local tourism organization estimated those visits generated $500 million in annual revenue that's now evaporating. Some Canadians are making their boycott deeply personal. Cam Hayden, 69, owner of the Edmonton Blues Festival and a regular at American blues events throughout the U.S., said he's boycotting the country until some sense of normalcy returns, calling it a matter of conscience. Sam Chung Yampin, 39, was excited about Coachella's lineup this year, but is skipping the California Music Festival he's attended 3 times previously. I have no plans on going to the U.S. for the next 4 years, the Vancouver-based marketing consultant said. Trump has repeatedly dismissed criticism of his tariffs and promised they'll generate vast revenues for Americans. We're going to become so rich you're not going to know where to spend all that money, he said. But the reality is that his tariffs are making Americans poorer by driving away their biggest source of international tourists and trade partners. The Canadian counter-tariffs are surgical and effective. In recognition of the U.S.'s approach to allow most Canadian goods to enter the U.S. tariff-free under CUSMA, Canada removed counter-tariffs on most U.S. imports in September 2025, but maintained tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles where the U.S. maintains its own tariffs. This strategic approach shows Canada's commitment to fair trade while protecting its core industries. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in North American economic relationships. The Canadian Association of Tour Operators proclaimed that the tariff war is on, calling on the industry to stand up against Trump's damaging tariffs. They're reminding lawmakers that tourism is not a luxury. It is a critical economic engine that creates jobs and drives prosperity for millions of people. The long-term implications are staggering. While some hope trade tensions will ease and that things will return to normal, consumer surveys indicate this shift in behavior could have lasting effects on U.S. companies, even after tariffs are resolved. The U.S. tariffs look like they're going to last for the duration of the Trump administration in one form or another. And that's going to keep other countries in a negative mood towards U.S. goods and services, said Gary Huffbauer, senior fellow at Peterson Institute for International Economics. Trump's trade war with Canada was supposed to demonstrate American strength and force concessions from a smaller neighbor. Instead, it has unified Canada, damaged American businesses, and created a powerful political movement that helped elect a new Canadian Prime Minister, specifically chosen for his ability to stand up to Trump. The Elbows Up movement represents more than just economic resistance. It's become a symbol of national sovereignty and dignity in the face of economic bullying. Mark Carney's victory in the Canadian election was largely seen as a referendum on Trump's policies, and Canadians chose to fight back rather than give in. As we look at the data, the massive drops in tourism, the collapse in alcohol sales, the shift in media consumption, the rise in Canadian nationalism, it's clear that Trump's tariff strategy has backfired spectacularly. He wanted to make America great again, but instead, he's made Canada more united, more independent, and more determined to find alternatives to American products and services. The lesson here is simple but profound. When you try to bully your closest ally and biggest trading partner, don't be surprised when they decide they don't need you as much as you thought they did. Trump's tariff war isn't making America great. It's making America isolated, and that's a price American workers and businesses are paying every single day.